Blood trickled down Elijah's small hand as the massive police dog fell silent at his touch. The officers froze weapons, trained on the blind 8-year-old black boy. "He knows," Elijah whispered, his sightless eyes, somehow finding the hidden camera. "Dad sent him to find me." Before I continue this incredible story of courage, connection, and fighting against discrimination, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe in the special bond between humans and animals, and subscribe to join our storytelling family for more powerful tales of triumph against all odds. The morning sun streamed through the tattered curtains of apartment 4B in the Oak Ridge complex, the least desirable section of Pinewood, Georgia, illuminating dust particles that danced around 8-year-old Elijah Jackson as he Elijah Jackson carefully felt for his clothes. His sensitive fingers moved with practiced precision despite never having seen the colors of the garments he selected. Elijah had been blind since birth, a condition that made him an automatic target in the predominantly white suburban town where he and his mother had moved 6 months ago. "Elijah, breakfast is ready," called Aisha Jackson, her voice carrying the exhaustion of her overnight shift at Pinewood Memorial Hospital. At 31, Aisha looked nearly 40. Her once vibrant face now perpetually creased with worry lines as she balanced her demanding job as a nurse with raising her son alone. The kitchen was small but spotless, a testament to Aisha's determination to provide dignity in their circumstances. "Did you finish your homework?" she asked, setting a plate of eggs and toast before him, guiding his hand to the fork. "Yes, but Mrs. Kinsella will probably say I didn't again," Elijah replied, his voice small yet somehow older than his years. School had become a daily battleground where teachers consistently underestimated his abilities, and peers avoided him with a mixture of discomfort over both his disability and his skin color. Just yesterday, Tyler Benson had loudly proclaimed that he didn't want the blind kid who can't even see he doesn't belong here assigned to his science group. Mrs. Kinsella had merely redirected Elijah to work alone again. Aisha squeezed her son's shoulder, fighting back tears. "You're brilliant, baby. Don't let anyone tell you different." She glanced at her watch, knowing they needed to leave soon. The bus driver had accidentally left Elijah at the stop twice last month, claiming he hadn't seen him waiting, though Elijah had been standing directly under the sign in his bright orange safety vest. Now Aisha drove him whenever possible, making her perpetually sleep-deprived. The wall calendar was marked with red circles around bill due dates, each one a reminder of their precarious financial situation. Pinewood had been their last option, after being priced out of Atlanta, where at least they'd had community. Here they were, perpetual outsiders. The landlord, Mr. Harrington, had initially tried to deny them the apartment, suddenly claiming it was already rented, until Aisha mentioned her lawyer friend. Even now, maintenance requests went mysteriously unanswered for weeks. As Elijah finished breakfast, his fingers found the framed photo on the table, tracing the outline of the man in military uniform. "Do you think Dad can see us from where he is?" he asked. Aisha's heart clenched. "I don't know, baby." Darius Jackson had disappeared 3 years ago during a classified mission. The military had eventually declared him missing in action, presumed dead, though they'd provided frustratingly few details. The sparse pension barely covered essentials. "I heard him last night in my dream," Elijah said, matter-of-factly. "He was telling me to listen for something important." Aisha kissed the top of his head, saying nothing about the dreams that had become more frequent. Elijah had always been unusual. His blindness seemingly compensated by heightened hearing, so acute he could recognize people by their footsteps and recall conversations verbatim. His connection with animals was equally remarkable. Stray cats appeared on their windowsill, neighborhood dogs strained at leashes to greet him. On the drive to school, Elijah suddenly tensed. "It's him again," he whispered as a police cruiser pulled alongside them at a red light. Officer Brendan Miller's pale face regarded them with thinly disguised suspicion. "Morning, Miss Jackson. Tail light looking a bit dim. Might want to get that checked." It was the third such warning this month, though the garage had found nothing wrong with their old Honda. Aisha nodded tightly, keeping her eyes forward. "Thank you, officer." The interaction was brief but left its familiar residue of tension and humiliation. At the school entrance, Aisha knelt to straighten Elijah's collar. "Remember what we practiced if anyone bothers you." Elijah nodded solemnly. "Stand tall, speak clearly, find a trusted adult." The words felt hollow to both of them. 2 hours later, the school office called. Elijah had been accused of stealing another student's calculator despite the obvious absurdity of a blind child taking visual tools. When Aisha arrived, she found her son sitting alone, his cane confiscated as potential evidence. The white parent had been immediately believed, while Elijah waited, isolated and frightened. The calculator was eventually found in the accuser's backpack, dismissed as a misunderstanding with no apology offered. That evening, as Aisha sorted through the mail, her fingers found an unmarked envelope containing only a weathered military dog tag. No note, no explanation. The metal felt warm in her palm as the evening news played quietly in the background. Local K9 unit faces controversy after police dog attacks third handler. The German Shepherd named Ranger is being evaluated after becoming increasingly aggressive and unresponsive to commands. Despite his exceptional tracking abilities, and expensive training officials are considering euthanasia if the animal cannot be controlled. The fluorescent lights of Pinewood Police Department's conference room cast harsh shadows across the tense faces gathered around the scratched wooden table. At the head sat Chief Wallace, a stocky white man in his 50s, whose complexion perpetually hovered between flushed and apoplectic. "This dog has cost the department $60,000 in training alone, not to mention the medical bills for 3 officers," he thundered, slapping a folder onto the table. Photographs spilled out showing vicious bite wounds. Ranger was supposed to be the crown jewel of our K9 program, not a liability that's going to get us sued. The German Shepherd in question was currently confined in a reinforced kennel in the basement, muzzled and sedated after his latest attack had sent Officer Donovan to the emergency room for 27 stitches. "Sir, with all due respect, something doesn't add up," interjected Officer Jessica Chen, the only Asian American on the force and one of just 4 female officers in the department. Ranger's original training evaluations show exceptional intelligence and responsiveness. Whatever's happening isn't aggression for aggression's sake. Several of the white male officers exchanged looks that silently communicated their dismissal of her opinion. Officer Grayson leaned over to Officer Miller, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "Of course she's defending it. Dog was probably trained on her kind of food." Chief Wallace cleared his throat loudly but made no effort to reprimand the comment. "Officer Chen, unless you've suddenly become a dog whisperer, I'm not interested in theories. The animal is dangerous and unpredictable." End of discussion. Chen's jaw tightened, but she persisted. "I've reviewed the footage from each incident. The attacks weren't random, they were triggered by specific actions from each handler." She reached for her tablet, but Chief Wallace waved her off. "Enough. We'll give it 48 hours for a final assessment, then make our decision." As the meeting concluded, Sergeant Ryan Cooper lingered behind his tall frame, imposing even in stillness. As head of the K9 unit, Cooper had personally selected Ranger from a specialized training facility with military connections. "I'll handle the final assessment," he stated flatly, his pale blue eyes revealing nothing. "The dog has potential we haven't tapped." Chief Wallace shrugged. "Your call, Sergeant. Just keep that beast muzzled. I don't need more injured officers." After everyone departed, Cooper remained alone, removing a secure phone from his pocket. "We have a situation with Asset R," he spoke quietly. "Conditioning is breaking down. Initiate containment protocol." Miles away at Pinewood Memorial Hospital, Aisha Jackson guided Elijah through the quiet back corridors toward the neurology department. Dr. Marcus Williams, one of the few black physicians on staff, had agreed to see Elijah after hours when Aisha mentioned her son's increasingly severe headaches. "Miss Jackson, good to see you, Doctor." Williams greeted them warmly, his deep voice instantly putting Elijah at ease. "And this must be the young man I've heard so much about." Elijah turned his head toward the doctor's voice with remarkable precision. "You smell like peppermint and antibacterial soap," he observed. Dr. Williams chuckled. "Impressive. Most people only notice the peppermint." The examination proceeded professionally, though Aisha noticed how carefully Dr. Williams documented every finding, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "I'd like to run an MRI," he finally said, "just to rule out anything concerning." Aisha's stomach nodded with worry. "Is something wrong?" Dr. Williams chose his words carefully. "Probably nothing but Elijah's descriptions of sound sensitivity, and these headaches warrant investigation." Later, as they awaited results in a quiet consultation room, Dr. Williams studied the brain scans with growing fascination. "Miss Jackson, have you ever had Elijah's auditory processing evaluated by a specialist?" he asked. Before Aisha could answer, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Code Silver basement level blared the overhead speaker, indicating a security threat. Hospital staff moved with practiced efficiency, securing doors and patients. "What's happening?" Aisha asked automatically, pulling Elijah closer. Dr. Williams peered through the window blinds. "Some kind of security alert. We should stay put until—" His words were cut short by the hospital-wide announcement. "Attention all staff and visitors. Pinewood Police Department has issued an alert regarding an escaped police K9. The animal is considered dangerous and potentially aggressive. Please remain indoors and report any sightings immediately." Elijah's head tilted slightly, as though listening to something beyond human hearing. "He's scared," the boy whispered. "Who's scared, honey?" Aisha asked. But Elijah merely shook his head, his sightless eyes wide. Dr. Williams slipped the brain scans into a folder, handing them discreetly to Aisha. "We should reschedule the rest of our consultation. Get Elijah home and stay indoors until they find that animal." As they drove home through darkened streets, police cruisers sped past with flashing lights, the manhunt for the escaped K9, turning the quiet suburb into a flurry of activity. Elijah remained unnaturally still in the passenger seat, his head occasionally turning as though tracking something invisible. That night, after tucking Elijah into bed, Aisha found herself studying the mysterious dog tag again, turning it over in her fingers as rain began pattering against the apartment windows. The tag bore no name, only a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her. Why now, after 3 years of silence, the sound of Elijah's voice jolted her from her thoughts. "Mom," he called urgently. She rushed to his bedroom to find him sitting upright, his unseeing eyes wide. "Someone's here," he whispered. Aisha froze, listening intently, but hearing nothing beyond the rain. Then a soft scratching at the bedroom window. A shadow moved against the raindrops. Aisha's heart hammered as she reached for her phone, ready to call 911. But Elijah was already moving toward the window with unerring confidence, his hand outstretched. "It's okay," he said softly. "He found me." The massive German shepherd stood dripping in the center of Elijah's small bedroom, its amber eyes fixed intently on the blind boy, who fearlessly extended his hand toward the animal's muzzle. "Elijah, don't move," Aisha whispered, terror freezing her in place as she recognized the police K9 from news reports. This was Ranger, the dog deemed too dangerous to control the animal that had savaged 3 trained officers, now standing inches from her blind son's vulnerable fingers. But instead of the attack Aisha expected, the dog lowered its head and gently pressed its nose against Elijah's palm, a low rumble emanating from its chest that sounded almost like contentment. "He's not going to hurt us, Mom," Elijah said with complete certainty, his small hand now moving along the dog's wet fur with the delicate precision that characterized all his movements. "He came looking for me." Aisha remained pressed against the wall, phone clutched in her hand. "Baby, that's the dangerous police dog they're searching for. We need to call animal control." Elijah shook his head firmly, his fingers continuing their exploration of the animal until they paused at the dog's ear. "There's something here," he murmured, tracing what appeared to be a small raised area beneath the fur. "A chip, I think. And it has a pattern on it." The dog stood perfectly still during this examination, its eyes never leaving Elijah's face. When the boy finally stepped back, the massive animal settled onto the floor beside his bed, as though it had found its designated place. "How did you know it was at the window?" Aisha asked, still maintaining her distance. Elijah tilted his head in that peculiar way he had when trying to explain things that seemed obvious to him. I could hear his heartbeat. "It's different from other dogs, faster but stronger." And he smells like Dad's jacket did. The mention of Darius sent a chill through Aisha. Before she could question further, flashing lights splashed red and blue across the bedroom walls as a police cruiser crawled down their street. The dog immediately tensed, a low growl building in its throat. "He's scared of them," Elijah whispered, placing a calming hand on the animal's head. "We need to hide him." What followed was a surreal scramble to conceal a 100-pound police dog in their small apartment. They managed to guide Ranger into the bathroom just as a sharp knock came at their door. Aisha's heart sank as she peered through the peephole to see Officer Miller's smug face staring back. "Miss Jackson," he drawled, when she opened the door, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "We're conducting a door-to-door search for an escaped police K-9. Dangerous animal attacked 3 of our officers." His eyes drifted past her, scanning what he could see of the apartment. "Mind if I take a quick look around? For your safety, of course." Aisha forced herself to remain calm despite the panic fluttering in her chest. "It's late, Officer Miller. My son is trying to sleep, unless you have a warrant." Miller's expression hardened. "Now, Miss Jackson, I'd hate to have to come back with a warrant. That would involve a lot more officers, a lot more disruption. Child Services might even need to evaluate whether this environment is safe for a blind child." The implied threat hung in the air between them. "We haven't seen any dog," Aisha stated, firmly fighting to keep her voice steady. "And I'd appreciate you not threatening me with Child Services for exercising my constitutional rights." Miller's pale face flushed with anger. "Your kind always want to make everything about rights. I'm trying to protect this community from a dangerous animal." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'll be watching this address. Anything suspicious, I'm coming back with that warrant." After he finally departed, Aisha collapsed against the closed door, shaking with suppressed fear and rage. "Is he gone?" Elijah called softly from his room. Aisha found her son sitting on the floor beside the bathroom door, the massive dog's head resting in his lap. "He's gone for now," she confirmed, still struggling to process the bizarre situation they'd found themselves in. "Elijah, how are you so comfortable with this animal? He's attacked people." Elijah's fingers continued their gentle exploration of the dog's ears. "He only attacked because they were hurting him." "He's special, Mom. I think Dad sent him." Before Aisha could question this bewildering statement, Elijah continued. "Remember how Dad used to teach me special words for emergencies?" A memory surfaced of Darius patiently working with 4-year-old Elijah, teaching him phrases in what Aisha had assumed was a game. Project Sentinel Elijah whispered now, his voice taking on a slightly different cadence. The effect on the dog was immediate and astonishing. Ranger's entire demeanor shifted, his posture straightening as though awaiting commands. Prometheus Elijah whispered next, and to Aisha's amazement the dog immediately performed a complex series of movements, checking the perimeter of the room before returning to Elijah's side. "How did you know to say that?" Aisha asked, stunned by the display. Elijah shrugged. "It just felt right, like the words were waiting in my mind." As Ranger settled again, Aisha noticed something protruding slightly from the dog's collar. Cautiously approaching, she discovered a small waterproof pouch sewn into the lining. Inside was a folded paper covered in handwriting she immediately recognized. "It's from your father," she whispered, her hands trembling as she unfolded the note. Have you ever had that moment when something seemingly impossible happens that makes you question everything you thought you knew? If you've experienced an unexplained connection with an animal or person that defied logic, comment number 1 below. If you believe some people have special abilities that science can't yet explain, hit that like button and subscribe to join us for more extraordinary true stories. What do you think Elijah's father wrote in that mysterious note? And how could a blind boy possibly command a dog that trained handlers couldn't control? The secret military project mentioned might hold the answers. But what? Dangerous truths are about to be revealed. The morning light crept reluctantly through the drawn blinds of the Jackson apartment as Aisha studied the documents they'd found hidden in Ranger's collar for the 100th time. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, her mind struggling to process what the papers revealed: coordinates, code phrases, and fragmentary references to something called Project Sentinel. Most disturbing was the hastily scrawled note in her husband's distinctive handwriting. "They're using us as test subjects. Trust no one. If Ranger finds you, Elijah is the key." Beside her on the worn couch, Elijah slept fitfully, one small hand resting on the massive German shepherd who hadn't left his side since arriving. Aisha checked her phone again, stomach churning at the local news notifications. Search continues for dangerous K9, and more alarmingly, police seek public's help identifying those harboring escaped animal. Their decision to keep Ranger hidden suddenly felt impossibly dangerous, yet the alternative seemed unthinkable after discovering Darius's message. The sharp trill of her phone shattered the morning quiet, the screen displaying her neighbor Mrs. Rivera's name. Aisha, the woman's voice, was hushed, urgent. "There's something you need to see. Channel 4 News. Now." Heart-pounding, Aisha switched on the television volume low. Her blood froze as grainy surveillance footage filled the screen clearly, showing Ranger entering their apartment through Elijah's window the previous night. The reporter's voice carried a note of sensationalism. "Police are investigating this footage, which appears to show the dangerous animal being taken in by residents of Oak Ridge Apartments." Officer Brendan Miller appeared on screen next, his expression grave. "We have reason to believe the animal may have been deliberately harbored. This is not just about a dog. This is about public safety and potentially obstruction of justice." The camera cut back to the anchor. "Sources tell us police are securing a warrant to search the premises identified in the footage." Aisha's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rivera. "They're coming." Multiple cars. Through the window, Aisha spotted 3 police cruisers pulling into the complex parking lot, Officer Miller emerging from the lead vehicle with a document in hand. "Elijah, wake up," she whispered urgently, shaking her son's shoulder. "We need to move, now." The boy came awake instantly, his unseeing eyes somehow finding her face. "They found us. It wasn't a question." With practiced efficiency born from their frequent safety drills exercises Aisha had implemented after their first encounter with racist harassment in Pinewood, they gathered the documents and Elijah's emergency backpack. The back window, Aisha instructed, guiding them toward the apartment's rear exit that led to a narrow maintenance pathway between buildings. Ranger Silent Elijah whispered in that strange cadence he used with the dog. The animal instantly stilled its movements, becoming nearly soundless as it pressed against the boy's leg. Just as they slipped through the window, they heard the heavy pounding on their front door. "Pinewood Police. We have a warrant." Ranger led them through the labyrinthine paths between apartment buildings, the dog somehow sensing when to pause as patrol cars circled the complex. They had nearly reached the wooded area bordering the property when Aisha felt a hand clamp on her shoulder. She whirled, preparing to fight, only to find Mrs. Rivera motioning them toward her ground-floor apartment. "Quick," the older woman whispered. "They're everywhere." Inside, Mrs. Rivera locked the door behind them. "My grandson's waiting with his car behind the laundry building. He'll take you where you need to go." Aisha fought back tears at this unexpected alliance. "Why are you helping us?" The woman's lined face hardened. "I know what it looks like when police hunt someone for reasons that have nothing to do with justice. My husband disappeared during a traffic stop in 1978. Before Aisha could respond, her phone vibrated with an incoming call from the hospital. Hesitantly, she answered. "Miss Jackson, this is Chief Wallace of the Pinewood Police. We're holding you for questioning regarding the harboring of a dangerous animal and potential endangerment of a minor." Aisha's heart stopped. They hadn't found her, so why? "I believe you're confused," she replied carefully. "I'm not at the police station." A cold chuckle came through the line. "No, but you will be. We've detained you at the hospital where you work." "Convenient, isn't it? Your supervisor called you in for an emergency shift." The implication was clear: they'd impersonated her to lure her in. "That woman isn't me," she stated flatly. "And you've just admitted to identity fraud, Chief Wallace." A pause then. "Your son can't run forever, Miss Jackson. A blind black boy with a police dog. They'll be found within hours. Unless you turn yourself in, Now I'll be forced to consider both of you actively evading police, which escalates this situation considerably." After ending the call, Aisha made a split-second decision. "Mrs. Rivera, can your grandson take Elijah and Ranger somewhere safe? I need to create a distraction." Despite Elijah's tearful protests, the plan was set. 30 minutes later, Mrs. Rivera's grandson Marcus drove away with Elijah and Ranger hidden under blankets in his back seat, heading for the address of James Washington Darius's old military friend who lived in the next county. Meanwhile, Aisha walked openly toward the hospital, drawing police attention exactly as intended. The interrogation room at the Pinewood Police Department smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Chief Wallace loomed over Aisha, his florid face contorted with barely contained rage. "Where is the dog, Miss Jackson?" he demanded for what seemed the 100th time. "And more importantly, where is your son Aisha?" maintained the calm dignity that had gotten her through countless encounters with racist patients and colleagues. "My son is with family friends because officers threatened to call child services on me without cause. As for the dog, I have no idea what you're talking about." Wallace slammed his palm on the table. "We have video evidence of the animal entering your apartment." Aisha kept her expression neutral. "And did this video show me letting it in or interacting with it in any way?" Her law school education, abandoned after 1 year when she became pregnant with Elijah, was finally proving useful. "We both know what's happening here, Chief Wallace. You've been harassing my family since we moved to Pinewood. Officer Miller has stopped me without cause at least 6 times. Now you're attempting to fabricate charges because—" The door swung open, interrupting her. Sergeant Cooper entered, his cold eyes assessing her with unnerving intensity. "Chief, a moment." The two men stepped outside, leaving Aisha alone with her racing thoughts. Miles away, Elijah sat in James Washington's modest living room, the older man, studying Ranger with undisguised amazement. "I never thought I'd see one of the Sentinel dogs again," he murmured, keeping a respectful distance from the animal who remained protectively close to Elijah. "Your daddy and I were part of the original program before it went sideways." Elijah's head tilted in that characteristic way. "What was Project Sentinel, Mr. Washington?" The veteran sighed heavily, the weight of classified memories evident in his voice. "It started as a program to enhance canine units for special operations. Dogs with heightened senses trained to respond to specific handlers using sonic imprinting." He paused, studying the blind boy intently. "But then they started experimenting with the handlers too, looking for ways to enhance human-canine neural connections. They discovered certain people, mostly children, with sensory processing differences, could form unusually strong bonds with the enhanced animals." "Like me," Elijah whispered. Washington nodded grimly. "Your father discovered they were testing experimental compounds on soldiers without proper consent, particularly Black and Hispanic service members. When he tried to expose it, he disappeared." The old soldier's hands trembled slightly. "These dogs aren't just trained, son. They've been genetically modified, given abilities beyond normal canines. And the way this one responds to you—" His voice trailed off as the sound of a vehicle approaching silenced them both. Washington peered through the blinds, his expression darkening. "We've got company." On the small television in the corner, breaking news interrupted regular programming. Surveillance footage from a gas station camera showed Elijah with Ranger, the Chiron beneath, reading, "Dangerous individuals harboring attack animal." In the grainy video, Elijah appeared to be controlling the dog with unusual hand movements. The reporter's voice carried clear alarm. "Police warn that the minor and animal should not be approached, as both may be unpredictable and dangerous." As flashlights swept the perimeter of Washington's property, Elijah's fingers found the microchip embedded in Ranger's ear again. This time, as his sensitive touch traced the pattern, something clicked in his mind. "Mr. Washington," he whispered urgently, "I think there's a message from my dad inside Ranger's chip." The flashlights of the tactical team swept across James Washington's darkened house as Elijah pressed his ear against the floor, listening to the footsteps surrounding them. "6 men, heavy tactical gear," he whispered with uncanny precision. "They're preparing to breach." Washington moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had never truly left combat behind, guiding them toward the kitchen pantry. "Your daddy wasn't the only one with secrets," he murmured, pressing against what appeared to be an ordinary wall panel. With a soft click, a section of flooring slid away, revealing a narrow staircase. "Underground Railroad," Washington explained as he ushered them into the passage. Not the original one, but built during the Civil Rights era when certain folks needed to disappear fast. The hidden door closed above them just as the sound of splintering wood announced the tactical team's entrance. Ranger led the way through the pitch-black tunnel, the dog's enhanced vision allowing Elijah to follow with one hand buried in its fur. Washington brought up the rear, his breathing labored, but movements sure. "These tunnels connect to a network," he explained softly, "built by the black community when Klan activity spiked in the 60s. Some of us veterans expanded them later just in case." The irony wasn't lost on Elijah that once again Black Americans needed secret pathways to escape persecution. Above them, the muffled sounds of destruction filtered down as the police tore through Washington's home. "They're planting something," Elijah whispered suddenly, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation the others couldn't detect. "Officer Miller is saying to make sure it looks like we were building explosives." Washington's sharp intake of breath confirmed the seriousness of this development. "They're escalating from dangerous animal to terrorism charges. They really don't want whatever's in that chip getting out." After nearly an hour of navigating the claustrophobic passages, they emerged through a concealed entrance in the floor of an abandoned church miles from Washington's home. Ranger immediately began a perimeter check, his movements displaying a tactical precision that seemed beyond normal canine capability. "He's been enhanced somehow," Washington observed. "Military working dogs are smart, but this is something else entirely." Elijah nodded his fingers once again, finding the microchip in Ranger's ear. "He understands complex concepts. When I whispered those code words, it wasn't just triggering training. It was like unlocking parts of his brain." Using a burner phone Washington had stashed in the tunnel, they made contact with Aisha, who had been released from questioning after 12 hours, when the police couldn't legally hold her longer without charges. She was being openly followed, making it impossible for her to join them, but she had managed to connect with Dr. Williams, who agreed to help. "The neural activity I saw on Elijah's scans was unusual," Dr. Williams explained when he arrived at the church hours later, bringing food supplies and his medical expertise. "His auditory processing centers show activity patterns I've never encountered before." As the doctor examined Ranger with cautious fascination, Elijah recounted what Washington had told him about Project Sentinel. "They were experimenting on soldiers without consent," he explained, his young voice heavy with the burden of this knowledge. "Mostly black soldiers like Dad." "Doctor?" Williams nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, consistent with America's medical history, from Tuskegee to present day, black bodies have often been used as experimental subjects without proper protections." Working together through the night, Dr. Williams used portable equipment to scan the microchip in Ranger's ear, revealing an encrypted data storage capability far beyond normal identification chips. "Your father embedded information here," he confirmed, connecting the scanner to a laptop. "Military-grade encryption, but he left clues in the sequencing that correspond to the code words Elijah somehow knows." As dawn approached, they had their first breakthrough, decoding a fragment of a personnel list that confirmed their worst fears. Sergeant Ryan Cooper Elijah read his fingers, tracing the braille display Dr. Salm Williams had brought. Project Overseer, responsible for special asset acquisition and containment. Washington's face darkened with recognition. "Cooper was the one who recruited your father. Claimed to be running a legitimate military working dog program. Darius discovered they were actually developing neural weapons using unwilling subjects. The most disturbing revelation came in the form of medical data showing genetic modifications performed on both animals and human subjects. They were creating paired assets." Dr. Williams explained, scientific objectivity barely masking his horror. "Dogs with enhanced capabilities bonded to handlers with specific neurological profiles. Your father was one of the handlers, Elijah, but he refused to allow them to test you when they discovered your unusual auditory processing abilities." A memory surfaced in Elijah's mind, his father teaching him to recognize specific sound frequencies, explaining it as a game, but with an urgency that even a 4-year-old could sense. "Dad was protecting me," he whispered. "That's why he disappeared." On the laptop screen, a video file began to play, showing Darius Jackson in military fatigues, his expression grim but determined. "If you're seeing this, Ranger found you," his recorded voice stated. "Cooper and his team have gone rogue, using Project Sentinel to develop weaponized human-canine pairs for private military contracts. They're targeting Black and Hispanic soldiers, exploiting regulatory loopholes that provide fewer protections for minorities in military research." The video continued, Darius explaining how he had discovered evidence of illegal testing and attempted to report it through proper channels, only to find the corruption reached into the highest levels. "I've embedded everything in Ranger's chip, including the names of everyone involved. He's programmed to find Elijah if anything happens to me. Trust the dog. He's been modified to protect my family at all costs." The video ended abruptly, leaving questions unanswered but confirming their suspicions. Cooper wasn't just a corrupt officer. He was the architect of a classified program exploiting racial disparities in military protections. While they processed this information, Dr. Williams received an urgent text from Aisha. "They've arrested her," he announced, his expression grave. "Fabricated charges of evidence tampering and endangering a minor. They're holding her without bail." On the news, the story had escalated. "Manhunt continues for dangerous fugitives harboring attack animal." Sources say potential connections to domestic terrorism being investigated. Washington's face hardened with resolve. They're trying to control the narrative. "We need to get this information out before they can silence all of us." They made plans to contact trustworthy journalists, but as night fell, Ranger suddenly went rigid, a low growl building in his throat. "Someone's coming," Elijah whispered, his head tilted in that distinctive listening pose. The church doors burst open, revealing Officer Chen, her weapon drawn but pointed downward. "Don't run," she said quietly. "I'm not here to arrest you. Cooper sent a tactical team to your mother's location. They're bringing her to a facility outside town. I think it's where they ran Project Sentinel." Hope and fear warred in Elijah's expression. "Why are you helping us?" Chen holstered her weapon slowly. "Because I saw them planting evidence in your apartment. Because I became a cop to protect people, not to help cover up military experiments on minorities." As they prepared to move, Ranger suddenly froze again, his attention fixed on something none of them could perceive. "They found us," Elijah whispered seconds before the sound of approaching vehicles confirmed his warning. "Ranger says there's another way out." Without questioning how the boy could know this, they followed, as Elijah, hand buried in the dog's fur, led them confidently toward a section of wall that concealed yet another passage. As they disappeared into the darkness, the church doors crashed open behind them, Sergeant Cooper's voice cutting through the chaos. "Find the dog and the boy. Terminate anyone else." The dense Georgia woods swallowed the small group as they moved through the pre-dawn darkness. Ranger leading with preternatural awareness of their surroundings. "Stay close," James Washington whispered, his military training, evident in how he periodically stopped to listen and check their back trail. "Cooper will have thermal imaging by now." Elijah moved with surprising confidence for a blind child, one hand on Ranger's back, the other occasionally reaching out to touch trees they passed. "The creek is 50 yards ahead," he murmured. "We should cross there to mask our scent." "Doctor." Williams exchanged amazed glances with Officer Chen, both increasingly convinced that the bond between boy and dog transcended normal explanation. "How do you know that?" Elijah, the doctor, asked quietly. The boy tilted his head in that characteristic listening pose. "Ranger sees it. I can. It's hard to explain. Like I can feel what he feels, see through his senses." They waded through the shallow creek, the cold water providing momentary relief from the unseasonable heat. 2 miles farther, they reached an abandoned hunting cabin Washington knew from his youth. "We can rest here briefly," the veteran decided, checking the perimeter, before allowing them inside. As dawn broke over the trees, they gathered around a battery-powered radio Officer Chen had brought, listening to the news with growing horror. The manhunt continues for 8-year-old Elijah Jackson and the dangerous animal he allegedly controls. Police spokesman Brendan Miller has confirmed that the child's mother, Aisha Jackson, is cooperating with authorities. Chen's expression darkened. "That's a lie. She's being held against her will." The broadcast continued. Sources close to the investigation suggest potential ties to domestic terrorism with evidence recovered from multiple locations. Washington spat in disgust. "They're setting up a narrative where killing us seems justified." While the adults strategized, Elijah sat with Ranger in the corner of the cabin, his sensitive fingers continuing to explore the microchip in the dog's ear. "There's more," he whispered suddenly. "Dad left coordinates." Using Officer Chen's secure phone, they pulled up satellite imagery of the location, a nondescript warehouse complex on the outskirts of Pinewood. "That's it," Washington confirmed grimly. The black site where they ran Project Sentinel under the cover of military canine training. Chen studied the compound with professional assessment. Heavy security. Motion sensors, armed guards. Getting in would be nearly impossible, Dr. Williams added. And Aisha is likely being held there now if Cooper is trying to use her as bait. The doctor had been monitoring the encrypted communications. Chen provided his expression, growing increasingly concerned. "They're mobilizing additional resources. Federal agencies have been told this is a counter-terrorism operation." Meanwhile, across town at the Pinewood Police Department, Officer Jessica Chen's absence had been noted. Her partner, Officer Reynolds, discovered her computer logged into classified files regarding Project Sentinel. When he reported this to Chief Wallace, the chief's typically florid face paled visibly. "Get Cooper on the line. Now." Reynolds hesitated. "Sir, there's something else." Chen was looking into evidence handling procedures for the Jackson case. She found inconsistencies in the chain of custody for the items recovered from their apartment. Wallace dismissed this with an impatient wave. "Not relevant. Cooper handles all aspects of this investigation now." But as Reynolds left, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began his own quiet investigation, reviewing body cam footage that showed Miller and other officers planting drug evidence in the Jacksons' apartment. Back in the forest, Elijah suddenly stiffened his head, turning sharply. "Helicopters," he announced seconds before the distant thrum of rotors reached the others. "They're using a search pattern. 3 aircraft. Washington was already moving, gathering their limited supplies. They're using military-grade search technology. We need to split up." The suggestion met immediate resistance until Elijah spoke with a certainty beyond his years. "Ranger and I need to go alone. They're tracking his chip. The rest of you should head west toward the highway." Chen shook her head firmly. "You're a child, Elijah. We're not leaving you alone in these woods with a fugitive military animal." The boy's unseeing eyes somehow found her face with unnerving accuracy. "Officer Chen, what you're seeing is exactly what they're counting on: public sympathy for a vulnerable child supposedly manipulated or kidnapped. But I'm the only one who can communicate with Ranger fully, and we move faster alone." Washington reluctantly backed the boy's assessment. "The dog protects him better than we can. And Cooper wants them alive. It's the rest of us he'll kill on sight." The decision was made. After sharing their remaining supplies and confirming rendezvous plans, they separated. Elijah and Ranger headed directly toward the coordinates in the microchip, moving with the silent efficiency of hunting predators. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of their mission, keeping close to the boy while constantly scanning for threats. Their progress through the forest was remarkable. When they encountered obstacles, Ranger would guide Elijah's hand to feel the terrain ahead, allowing the boy to navigate with confidence. "Dad trained you for this, didn't he?" Elijah whispered as they paused by a stream. "To find me if something went wrong." The dog's intelligent eyes fixed on the boy with an awareness that seemed nearly human. Meanwhile, Officer Chen, Washington, and Dr. Williams created a deliberate false trail heading west, leaving clear signs of passage for pursuers to follow. Their diversion worked. Within hours, helicopter activity concentrated on their location, while Elijah and Ranger slipped undetected toward the warehouse compound. As night fell, Elijah and Ranger reached the perimeter of the facility. Security was formidable: armed guards, motion sensors, and electrified fencing. Yet the boy showed no hesitation. "Prometheus sequence," he whispered to Ranger in that special cadence. The dog's demeanor shifted instantly, its movements becoming more calculated as it led Elijah to a drainage culvert partially hidden by overgrowth. The passage was tight but navigable, clearly part of the original design but forgotten in subsequent security upgrades. As they emerged inside, the compound alarms suddenly blared from the main building. "That's not for us." Elijah realized his acute hearing distinguishing the patterns. Something else triggered it. Inside the facility, Aisha Jackson was being interrogated by Sergeant Cooper in a sterile white room that reeked of antiseptic. "Your son has demonstrated extraordinary capabilities," Miss Jackson Cooper stated flatly. "Capabilities that suggest genetic compatibility with our program." Aisha maintained the dignified silence she'd held throughout her detention, revealing nothing despite exhaustion and fear. "Your husband made a choice to betray his country," Cooper continued. "He stole classified property and embedded sensitive information in that animal's tracking chip." For the first time, Aisha spoke. "You experimented on American soldiers without consent, targeting Black and Hispanic men because you thought no one would fight for them." Cooper's cold smile never reached his eyes. "Military research has different regulatory standards. Everything we did was technically legal." "Legal isn't the same as moral," Aisha countered. "And you know it, or you wouldn't be working so hard to cover it up." Before Cooper could respond, his secure phone buzzed. What he snapped, then listened intently, his expression hardening. "Lock down the facility. Full containment protocol." Turning to Aisha with renewed intensity, he leaned closer. "Your son has arrived, right on schedule." As Elijah and Ranger navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the facility, they encountered remarkably little resistance. "They want us to reach a specific location," Elijah whispered to Ranger, sensing the trap but proceeding anyway. The dog led him unerringly through the complex until they reached a reinforced door marked simply "Cold Storage." Using the access codes embedded in the microchip, they entered a vast chamber filled with the soft hum of machinery. Elijah's sensitive fingers explored the nearest unit, recognizing the shape of a cryogenic chamber. "There are people inside these," he whispered in horror, his enhanced hearing detecting faint heartbeats within multiple units. As he moved deeper into the facility, his hand brushed against a chamber that felt different somehow. Ranger whined softly, pushing against his leg to draw attention to this particular unit. When Elijah's fingers found the identification panel, his heart nearly stopped. The name registered in his sensitive touch, Jackson D. "Did you ever suspect there were secret government programs conducting unethical experiments on minority soldiers?" Comment number 1. If you believe these kinds of operations might still exist today. Hit like and subscribe if you're riveted by this story of courage and extraordinary connection between a special boy and his canine protector. How do you think Elijah will react to finding his father's cryogenic chamber, and what will happen when Cooper finally confronts them face-to-face with Aisha as his hostage? The answers might be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The harsh fluorescent lights of the cryogenic chamber cast an eerie blue glow across Elijah's face as his fingers trembled against the control panel of his father's unit. "Dad," he whispered, the single word carrying years of longing and confusion. Ranger stood alert beside him, amber eyes constantly scanning the room for threats, as the facility's alarms continued their rhythmic wailing. The cryogenic pod emitted a series of mechanical clicks as ancient security protocols recognized something in Elijah's touch, initiating what appeared to be a revival sequence. Warning lights flashed along the unit's edge as temperature gauges began a gradual rise. Elijah's acute hearing picked up footsteps approaching from multiple directions. "They're coming," he murmured to Ranger, who instantly moved into a protective stance. The massive dog's behavior had evolved beyond mere training. There was calculation in its movements now, an almost human assessment of their tactical position. "We need to find Mom first," Elijah decided reluctantly, stepping away from his father's chamber. "Dad's revival sequence is running. He'll need more time." With Ranger guiding him, Elijah navigated through the labyrinthine facility, the dog somehow sensing which corridors to avoid as security teams swept the complex. Their seemingly impossible evasion of capture was no accident. The facility's design included blind spots in surveillance, specifically created for the Project Sentinel canine units to exploit during testing scenarios. Those same blind spots now served Elijah and Ranger perfectly. Several floors above Aisha strained against her restraints as Sergeant Cooper studied surveillance monitors with increasing frustration. "Your son is proving remarkably elusive," he observed with cold admiration. "The neural connection with the dog is even stronger than our projections suggested." Aisha maintained her defiant silence, though internally her heart swelled with fierce pride. Cooper's attention shifted to another monitor, showing the cryogenic chamber where Darius Jackson's pod had begun its revival process. "Interesting choice," he murmured. Awakening his father first, rather than attempting rescue. He turned to Aisha with clinical curiosity. "Did you know your husband volunteered for the first phase of Project Sentinel? His genetic markers showed exceptional compatibility with our enhanced canines." Aisha's expression betrayed nothing, though Cooper's words sent icy tendrils of dread through her. "What did you do to him?" Cooper's smile never reached his eyes. Initially, nothing he didn't consent to. Darius was a patriot who believed in advancing military capabilities. It was only later, when we expanded testing parameters, that he developed ethical concerns. In another part of the facility, the group of families connected to missing Project Sentinel soldiers monitored Elijah's progress through hacked security feeds. Their underground network had been gathering evidence of the program for years, though never managing to penetrate the facility itself until now. "The boy is heading toward the interrogation sector," observed an older woman whose husband had disappeared 5 years earlier. "He's tracking his mother somehow." Their makeshift command center hummed with cautious activity, each person acutely aware that their location could be compromised at any moment. "We need to prepare for extraction," stated a former military officer whose brother had been among the first to vanish. "Once they have both parents, Cooper will deploy everything to recapture or eliminate them." As they coordinated their limited resources, none noticed the subtle shift in one of their newest members, a man who kept to the shadows, his attention fixed not on helping Elijah, but on tracking his exact position within the facility. Inside the complex, Elijah and Ranger had reached the detention level when the dog suddenly froze, a low growl building in his throat. "What is it?" Elijah whispered, his hand buried in the animal's fur. Before Ranger could respond, a new scent reached them, familiar yet wrong somehow. "Hello, Elijah," came a voice from the shadows. "I've been waiting for you to find us." James Washington stepped into view, but his posture and voice carried none of the protective warmth from earlier. Ranger's growl intensified as Elijah took an instinctive step backward. "Mr. Washington." The old veteran's laugh held no humor. "I've been Cooper's asset from the beginning, son. How do you think they always managed to stay one step behind? Darius never quite catching him, but never letting him expose the program. Either Elijah's mind raced processing this betrayal against everything they'd experienced. You helped us escape. You showed us the tunnels. Washington shrugged. Controlled opposition. I've been feeding Cooper your location at every step. We needed you to lead us to whatever failsafe your father embedded in that dog's chip. The sound of additional footsteps announced the arrival of armed security personnel surrounding them in a tightening circle. I am sorry about this part, Washington added almost gently. You're a special kid. But Project Sentinel is bigger than any of us. As guards moved to restrain him, Elijah whispered a command to Ranger that Washington couldn't hear. The massive dog appeared to submit, allowing handlers to approach with capture equipment. The moment they came within range, however, Ranger exploded into action with stunning speed and precision, creating just enough chaos for Elijah to slip between the guards. "Stop him," Washington shouted. But the blind boy moved with uncanny awareness of his surroundings, evading grasping hands as Ranger systematically disabled their pursuers without lethal force. They escaped down a maintenance shaft, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. "They wanted us to find Dad," Elijah realized aloud as they navigated through narrow utility passages. Washington betrayed him from the beginning. The knowledge settled like lead in his chest, but there was no time for grief. His sensitive hearing detected his mother's voice several levels above, arguing fiercely with Cooper. With renewed determination, Elijah and Ranger made their way toward her location. Meanwhile, in the cryogenic chamber, the revival process for Darius Jackson's pod reached completion. The sealed unit hissed as pressure equalized the reinforced glass cover sliding back to reveal its occupant. The man who opened his eyes after 3 years in suspended animation bore Darius's features, but seemed somehow diminished, his once powerful frame thinner, his movements uncertain. Medical staff approached, cautiously monitoring vital signs as awareness gradually returned to his expression. "Welcome back." Specialist Jackson Cooper greeted him from the doorway, having left Aisha under guard, to witness this moment personally. "Your son has caused quite the commotion on your behalf." The awakened soldier's eyes focused slowly, confusion evident. "Son," he repeated, the words seeming foreign on his tongue. "I don't." Cooper's smile was cold satisfaction personified. "Memory gaps are expected after prolonged cryostasis. Don't worry, it will return slowly, though perhaps not in the way you might hope." In the interrogation sector, Aisha continued her efforts to loosen her restraints, freezing when the door suddenly opened. Instead of Cooper returning, she found herself staring at Officer Jessica Chen, who quickly moved to release her. "Doctor, Williams and I created a diversion at the perimeter," Chen explained in hurried whispers. "The external security teams are scattered, but it won't last long." As Aisha's restraints fell away, Chen handed her a secure phone. "The network has transportation standing by. They've identified 3 possible extraction routes." Hope flared in Aisha's chest for the first time in days. "Elijah, have you found him?" Chen's expression tightened. "He's in the facility somewhere. Ranger is with him." "That's all we know right now." Before they could plan further, alarms changed pitch throughout the complex. Chen checked her stolen security tablet. "They're initiating complete lockdown. Something's happened in the cryogenic section." Elijah and Ranger had indeed reached the cryogenic chambers again, finding the previously sealed pod now empty. "Dad was here," Elijah whispered, his sensitive fingers detecting the lingering warmth on the unit's surface. "They've moved him." Ranger nudged his hand, urgently directing his attention to the other pods in the vast chamber. Elijah moved from unit to unit, his touch revealing the identities of dozens of soldiers in suspended animation. "They're all here," he realized, with growing horror. Everyone who disappeared from the program. His exploration was interrupted by the facility's shift to lockdown protocols. Heavy security doors began sealing automatically throughout the complex. "We need to find Mom and get everyone out," Elijah told Ranger, his young voice suddenly carrying the weight of impossible responsibility. As they navigated toward the interrogation sector where Elijah sensed his mother was located, they encountered increasing resistance from security forces. With each confrontation, Ranger demonstrated combat capabilities far beyond normal canine training, disabling opponents with precise, non-lethal interventions while protecting Elijah from harm. The boy himself showed remarkable spatial awareness, moving through the chaos with preternatural confidence despite his blindness. When they finally reached the interrogation room, they found it empty, except for signs of a recent struggle. They were here. Elijah confirmed his acute senses, detecting his mother's familiar scent mingled with Officer Chen's. Something happened. A security monitor in the corner suddenly activated, revealing Cooper's face. "Impressive work. Navigating my facility, young Mr. Jackson," he stated, no warmth in his voice, despite the compliment. "I believe you're looking for your family. They're waiting for you in the primary research lab." The screen split to show Aisha and a disoriented man resembling Darius, both under heavy guard. "Your choice is simple. Surrender yourself and the dog for proper processing, and your parents go free. Resist, and they return to cryostasis permanently this time." Elijah's unseeing eyes narrowed as he processed this ultimatum. "Ranger," he whispered too softly for the monitoring systems to detect. "Prometheus override." The dog's posture shifted subtly, something changing in its intelligent gaze. Together they moved toward the research lab, appearing to comply with Cooper's demands, while Ranger received continuous instructions through Elijah's nearly inaudible whispers. What Cooper couldn't know was that during their journey through the facility, Elijah had used the dog's enhanced senses to memorize the complete layout, identifying critical systems and weaknesses. The trap was set, but not necessarily in the way Cooper anticipated. The primary research lab of Project Sentinel stretched before Elijah like a cathedral of scientific hubris, its vast space filled with specialized equipment humming at frequencies only his enhanced hearing could detect. Cooper stood at its center, a tactical team surrounding Aisha and the disoriented man believed to be Darius Jackson. "Welcome to where it all began," Cooper announced as Elijah and Ranger entered, security personnel immediately moving to flank them. Project Sentinel's crowning achievement. Aisha strained against her captors, her voice breaking with emotion. "Elijah, baby, I'm so sorry." Elijah's unseeing eyes moved with unnerving precision toward his mother's voice, then shifted to the man beside her. "That's not Dad," he stated with quiet certainty. The declaration froze everyone momentarily, Cooper's expression flickering with surprise before settling into calculated assessment. "Interesting. What makes you say that young Mr. Jackson?" Elijah tilted his head in that characteristic listening pose. "His heartbeat is wrong, his breathing pattern, even his scent is similar, but different." The man who resembled Darius looked down at his own hands as though seeing them for the first time, confusion evident in his features. "I don't understand. They told me I was Darius Jackson." Ranger moved protectively closer to Elijah, the dog's intelligent eyes scanning the room continuously. Cooper's thin smile held no warmth. "Very observant. We underestimated your sensory capabilities even knowing your father's genetic profile." He gestured toward the confused man. "Meet Subject 17, formerly known as Xavier Jackson. Darius's identical twin brother, separated at birth through our adoption network that identifies potentially compatible genetic candidates." The revelation sent visible shock through both Aisha and Elijah. "Darius never mentioned a twin," Aisha whispered. "He was raised in foster care. He never knew his birth family." Cooper nodded with clinical detachment. "By design, we've been cultivating genetic lines for decades, Miss Jackson. The enhanced human-canine neural connection requires specific markers that appear most prominently in certain bloodlines." His attention returned to Elijah. "Your blindness isn't a disability, it's an adaptation. Your visual cortex has been repurposed for processing the neural link with our enhanced canines." As this horrifying explanation unfolded, Officer Chen was methodically working through the facility's lower levels, freeing the awakened soldiers from the cryogenic chambers. The disoriented men and women, predominantly Black and Hispanic service members, followed her lead with the uncertain movements of people long removed from their own bodies. Dr. Williams moved among them, providing basic medical assessment while guiding them toward extraction points identified by the support network. Outside the facility, media vans had begun to gather. Officer Reynolds, having discovered the extent of corruption within the Pinewood Police Department, had contacted trusted journalists with evidence of the planted drugs and falsified warrants. The emerging scandal had drawn national attention, with initial reports focusing on racial profiling and corruption. No one yet understood the true scope of what lay within the nondescript warehouse complex. Inside the research lab, Cooper continued his calculated monologue, each word revealing more of the program's disturbing reality. Project Sentinel began as a simple question: could we create the perfect soldier canine team by enhancing both sides of the equation? The dogs were easy genetic modification, specialized training. But the human handlers proved more challenging until we discovered the neural compatibility markers. Elijah absorbed this information with remarkable composure for an 8-year-old, his hand resting steadily on Ranger's back. "You targeted minority soldiers because you knew they had less protection under military research protocols," he stated, not asked. Cooper's eyebrows raised slightly. "You've been well informed. Yes, there are certain regulatory flexibilities when working with volunteer populations from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Your father understood this initially. He was a willing participant until Phase 3, when we began experimenting with his genetic material." Aisha's expression hardened with fury. "You stole his DNA to create more test subjects." The clinical detachment in Cooper's voice never wavered. Created is more accurate than stole. The embryonic testing was fully sanctioned by military oversight committees. Before he could continue this disturbing explanation, alarms blared throughout the facility. Cooper checked a security tablet, his composure finally cracking. What is happening in cryo-storage? Outside the research lab, chaos had erupted as the awakened soldiers led by Officer Chen fought their way upward through the facility. These weren't ordinary veterans, but enhanced operators, each one selected for the same genetic markers that made Darius exceptional. Though weakened from cryostasis, their specialized training remained intact, allowing them to systematically disable security systems and neutralize resistance. Cooper barked orders into his comm unit, deploying additional security teams to contain the unexpected rebellion. His attention divided, he failed to notice Elijah whispering to Ranger, the dog's posture subtly shifting in response. "Your father embedded a failsafe in Ranger's programming," Elijah stated calmly. "He knew someone would eventually try to use the dog against us." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Cooper's features. Impossible. The neural implants are hardwired with loyalty protocols. The animal cannot disobey direct commands from authorized handlers. Elijah's unseeing eyes somehow found Cooper's face with unnerving accuracy. Dad wasn't just a subject. He helped design the neural architecture. He built in backdoors only he and I could access. The facility's power fluctuated emergency lighting, casting harsh shadows across the increasingly tense standoff. Cooper's tactical team shifted nervously as sounds of fighting drew closer to the research lab. "Enough games," Cooper snapped, his careful facade crumbling under pressure. "Surrender the dog and submit to processing, or watch your mother join our cryo-storage permanently." The threat hung in the air for one tense moment before being interrupted by the crash of the lab's reinforced doors bursting inward. The awakened soldiers poured in, led by Officer Chen and Dr. 12. Williams, quickly overwhelming Cooper's security team through superior training and coordinated tactics. As chaos erupted around them, Cooper grabbed Aisha, dragging her toward a secondary exit while shouting into his comm unit for extraction. Xavier, the man they had believed was Darius, seized this moment to break free from his guards, moving with unexpected speed to intercept Cooper. "You kept me frozen for 5 years. He growled, memories visibly returning as adrenaline flooded his system. "Used me as a genetic template for your experiments." Cooper abandoned Aisha to defend himself, revealing combat training that matched Xavier's as the two men engaged in a brutal exchange. Elijah used this distraction to make his way to his mother, Ranger, clearing a path through the melee with precision that spoke to his enhanced capabilities. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, as his hands found her face, checking for injuries with gentle efficiency. Aisha clutched him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, how did you do all this? How did you find me?" Before Elijah could answer, the facility's external alarms activated, indicating a perimeter breach. Through the lab's observation windows, they could see police vehicles and media vans converging on the complex, drawn by the evidence Officer Reynolds had released, combined with Chen's strategic anonymous tips. The standoff had expanded beyond the facility walls, now playing out on a public stage Cooper could no longer control. Realizing his position was compromised, Cooper abandoned his fight with Xavier, activating an emergency protocol on his secure tablet. Throughout the facility, remaining security systems initiated a scorched earth sequence designed to eliminate evidence. "The place is set to self-destruct," Xavier warned, recognizing the pattern of alerts. "We have 15 minutes to evacuate." As they organized the disoriented soldiers for evacuation, Cooper made one final desperate play. Breaking away from the group, he circled back through a maintenance passage, emerging behind Elijah and Ranger with a specialized neural disruptor device. "Asset Ranger activation sequence, Prometheus Omega Black," he commanded, using the master override designed for emergency containment of enhanced animals. The effect on Ranger was immediate and horrifying. The dog's entire demeanor transformed, its gentle protectiveness replaced by rigid mechanical obedience as dormant programming activated. Cooper smiled in cold triumph. "Asset Ranger primary directive: eliminate the Jackson bloodline. Execute immediately." The massive dog turned slowly toward Elijah, its movements now robotic and alien. Aisha screamed, lunging toward her son, but security personnel held her back as Cooper's final contingency unfolded. "You didn't think we'd create weapons without fail-safes, did you?" Cooper taunted. "Every enhanced animal has termination protocols in case they ever turn against their handlers. Your father knew this, but thought he'd remove them all from Ranger. He missed one." Elijah stood perfectly still as Ranger approached, the boy's expression calm despite facing what appeared to be certain death. Those watching held their breath, expecting tragedy, but instead witnessing something extraordinary. Sentinel Genesis, "Override Elijah," whispered in that special cadence, his voice carrying frequencies beyond normal human hearing. Father-son connection. The change in Ranger was instantaneous. The mechanical quality vanished from his movements as the dog shook violently, Cooper's programming visibly fighting against deeper, more fundamental coding. For several agonizing seconds, the outcome hung in balance as Ranger stood frozen between opposing commands. Then, with deliberate clarity of purpose, the dog turned away from Elijah and launched himself at Cooper, instead pinning the man to the ground with precision that allowed no escape but caused no serious injury. How Cooper gasped genuine shock, replacing his clinical detachment. Elijah approached slowly, his hand finding Ranger's fur with unerring accuracy. "Dad knew you'd build in kill switches. So he built in something stronger, authentic neural bonding, that can't be overridden by commands. Ranger doesn't obey me, he chooses me." As facility evacuation continued around them, national media crews captured the emerging survivors, their cameras documenting evidence of the classified program before government containment teams could suppress it. The story was already spreading unauthorized experimentation on minority service members, enhanced animals, and the blind black child who had exposed it all. In the research lab, Xavier approached Elijah, slowly, uncertainty in his movements. "You knew I wasn't your father right away," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't even know I had a brother until today, let alone a nephew." Elijah's hand reached out, finding Xavier's face with gentle exploration. "Your family," he stated simply. "Dad would want us to help you." The reunited Jackson family made their way toward the evacuation point, Ranger leading them through the rapidly deteriorating facility as Cooper's scorched earth protocols accelerated. Behind them, Cooper himself was taken into custody by federal agents who had arrived with the media, the public nature of the unfolding scandal, preventing the quiet disappearance of evidence that might otherwise have occurred. Outside, beneath the harsh glare of news helicopters and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, the true scope of Project Sentinel became impossible to hide. Dozens of enhanced soldiers, predominantly minorities, emerged from cryogenic imprisonment. Documents salvaged by Chen and Williams provided irrefutable evidence of racial targeting in military research programs. Officer Chen approached Chief Wallace as he arrived at the scene, cameras capturing his ashen expression as she publicly presented evidence of corruption within the Pinewood Police Department. "You authorized illegal searches," she stated for the record. "Planted evidence in the home of an innocent family based on racial profiling." The police chief's career ended in that moment, his stammered denials drowned out by the emergence of more Project Sentinel survivors. As medical teams attended to the former test subjects, Elijah found himself at the center of growing attention, reporters clamoring for statements from the blind boy who had exposed a classified military program. Dr. Williams ran interference, protecting the child from the overwhelming stimuli, while Officer Chen coordinated with federal authorities, now scrambling to contain the political fallout. Xavier, still struggling with his newly awakened memories, stood protectively near Aisha and Elijah, his presence, a bittersweet reminder of the brother who remained missing. "Is Dad really gone?" Elijah asked quietly when the family had a moment of relative privacy. Xavier's expression reflected painful uncertainty. "I don't know. If they kept me all these years, they might have him somewhere, too." Ranger pressed against Elijah's leg, the dog's alert posture, suggesting their journey wasn't yet complete. As federal agents established a perimeter around the facility, the full impact of what Elijah had uncovered began to ripple through military and government circles. Project Sentinel had operated in the shadows for decades, its systemic exploitation of racial disparities in military protections now exposed for public scrutiny. The standoff had ended, but the reckoning was just beginning. 3 months after the dramatic exposure of Project Sentinel, Elijah Jackson sat on the porch of a modest farmhouse 30 miles outside Atlanta Ranger, stretched protectively beside him as autumn leaves danced across the yard. The property, purchased with part of the government settlement awarded to victims of the program, offered the privacy the family desperately needed after weeks of relentless media attention. Inside, Aisha and Xavier discussed renovation plans for what would eventually become a rehabilitation center for other survivors, their voices carrying faintly to Elijah's sensitive ears. The events following the standoff had unfolded with dizzying speed. Congressional hearings exposed the systematic targeting of minority soldiers for experimental military research, with racial disparities in protective regulations exploited to fast-track questionable studies. Cooper faced multiple federal charges, his trial scheduled for spring. Chief Wallace and Officer Miller had been arrested for evidence, tampering, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice, their cases becoming cautionary examples in police reform initiatives. Officer Chen had received a promotion to lead a newly established oversight division within the department, implementing sweeping accountability measures, with Dr. Williams serving as civilian consultant. The awakened soldiers, once they recovered from cryostasis, provided devastating testimony about their experiences, many reuniting with families who had believed them dead or deserted. Support networks formed among these survivors, creating a brotherhood and sisterhood of shared trauma and recovery. Yet amid these positive developments, one question remained painfully unanswered. Darius Jackson's whereabouts remained unknown. Despite extensive searches of all identified Project Sentinel facilities, no trace of Elijah's father had been found. The microchip in Ranger's ear had yielded all its secrets except this one crucial piece of information. As Elijah sat contemplating these thoughts, a familiar vehicle approached down the long driveway. "Officer Chen is here," he announced before the car engine was audible to normal hearing. Aisha came onto the porch, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. She said she had important news. Jessica Chen emerged from her car carrying a secure tablet and a thick folder stamped with government classification markers. Her expression was carefully neutral as she greeted them. "The Oversight Committee has authorized me to share some findings with you," she began, after declining offers of refreshment. "We've been analyzing data recovered from Cooper's personal servers." Ranger moved closer to Elijah, sensing the boy's tension. "Did you find Dad?" Elijah asked directly, hope and fear mingling in his voice. Chen chose her words with care. "We found evidence that Darius was never in cryostasis like the others. According to Cooper's private logs, your father escaped during initial capture attempts and implemented his contingency plan with Ranger before disappearing." Xavier joined them on the porch, his resemblance to his missing twin both comfort and reminder of their loss. "So he could still be alive somewhere." Chen nodded cautiously. "It's possible." Cooper devoted significant resources to locating him without success. She hesitated, then continued. "There's something else. Analysis of Elijah's medical scans shows his condition isn't congenital blindness as previously thought. The visual cortex repurposing Officer Cooper mentioned appears to be an intentional genetic adaptation, likely part of what made the Jackson bloodline valuable to the program. Aisha's expression hardened. "Are you saying they caused his blindness?" Chen shook her head. "The evidence suggests something more complex. The adaptation appears engineered for enhanced neural connections beyond normal human capability. Elijah's blindness isn't a disability in this context. It's a specialization that allows unprecedented connection with Ranger and potentially other enhanced animals." This revelation settled heavily over the family. Elijah, however, seemed unsurprised. "I always knew I was different, even before Ranger found me," he said quietly. "I could hear things. Others couldn't sense things that weren't obvious. Dr. Williams arrived later that day, bringing additional scientific context to these discoveries. "The neural architecture is remarkable," he explained, reviewing Elijah's latest scans. Your father may have been aware of these adaptations, which would explain his protective measures and the special training he gave you as a child. In the days that followed, Elijah spent increasing time with Ranger, their bond deepening beyond the already extraordinary connection they shared. The dog seemed to be trying to communicate something beyond their established patterns, leading Elijah repeatedly to specific locations around the property with growing urgency. "He wants to show me something," Elijah explained to his mother one evening. "But I'm missing part of the message." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a thunderstorm that rattled windows and flooded the property's lower fields. As lightning struck nearby, Elijah suddenly sat upright in bed, his unseeing eyes wide. "That's it," he whispered. "The electrical frequency. Dad encoded something that only activates under specific electromagnetic conditions." With Ranger leading him through the storm-lashed darkness, Elijah made his way to an old oak tree at the property's boundary. There, as lightning illuminated the countryside in stroboscopic flashes, the dog began digging frantically at the tree's base. Xavier, who had followed them with a flashlight, helped unearth what appeared to be a waterproof military container buried years earlier. Inside lay a final message from Darius Jackson, along with documents detailing a secondary failsafe location and coordinates to a remote cabin where he had gone into hiding after discovering the true nature of Project Sentinel. If you're reading this, the letter began in Darius's distinctive handwriting. "Ranger found you, and you've survived Cooper's program. I couldn't risk returning until I was certain the project was exposed and neutralized. The cabin coordinates are our rendezvous point. Come alone with Ranger when it's safe." 2 weeks later, after careful security preparations and verification of the location, Elijah and Ranger made the journey to the designated coordinates deep in the Appalachian wilderness. The cabin appeared abandoned at first glance, weather-beaten, and partially reclaimed by the surrounding forest. But as they approached, Ranger's behavior changed his movements, taking on the alert precision of recognition. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a bearded man whose features mirrored Xavier's, but carried additional years of hardship and vigilance. For a long moment, father and son stood motionless, separated by years of absence, and the painful journey that had brought them to this moment. "You've grown," Darius Jackson finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "And you found Ranger just like I hoped you would." Elijah moved forward with unerring accuracy, his hands finding his father's face, fingers tracing features simultaneously familiar and new. "I always knew you didn't abandon us," he whispered. "I heard you in my dreams." The reunion that followed brought healing long denied to the fragmented family. Darius explained his years in hiding, gathering evidence against Project Sentinel while developing the fail-safes that had ultimately led to its exposure. "I couldn't come home," he explained, as they sat beside a modest fire. "They were watching Aisha, and you, constantly. Any contact would have endangered you both more than my absence." His fingers brushed the microchip in Ranger's ear. "This good boy was my only way to send you a message when the time was right." When they returned to the farmhouse, bringing Darius home to an emotional reunion with Aisha and the twin brother he'd never known, existed. The family began the complex process of rebuilding lives, shattered by military exploitation and racial targeting. The Justice Department's investigation continued expanding, revealing patterns of discriminatory practices in military research dating back decades. Settlements were announced for affected families, though no amount of compensation could truly address the violations they had endured. Elijah's extraordinary abilities became the foundation for a new understanding of human potential rather than weapons development. With Dr. Williams's guidance and Officer Chen's protective oversight, he established a training program for service dogs, assisting disabled children, particularly those from minority communities, often overlooked by traditional support systems. Ranger remained by his side, their bond a living testament to connection that transcended both design and intention. The Jackson family launched a foundation dedicated to fighting systemic racism in scientific research, with Xavier offering his unique perspective as both victim and survivor of the program that had exploited his genetic heritage. Darius, once his identity was verified and name cleared, provided expert testimony that strengthened protective regulations across military and civilian research domains. 1 year after the facility standoff on a bright spring morning, Elijah stood before an audience of scientists, ethicists, and government officials, Ranger at his side as always. Though still legally blind, his perceptual abilities had continued developing in remarkable ways, allowing him to navigate the world with confidence that belied traditional definitions of disability. "What happened to my family wasn't an isolated incident," he stated, his young voice carrying unexpected authority. "It was the predictable outcome of systems that value some lives less than others." The Project Sentinel documents showed Black and Hispanic soldiers were selected at rates 4 times higher than their white counterparts, with fewer protections and less oversight. He paused, his unseeing eyes, somehow finding the camera broadcasting his words nationally. But our story isn't just about exploitation. It's about the strength of connection between father and son, between humans and animals, between people willing to stand against injustice regardless of personal risk. As he concluded his address, Ranger pressed supportively against his leg, a reminder of the extraordinary bond that had exposed corruption and reunited a family torn apart by discrimination and military overreach. The whispered word that had once calmed an uncontrollable canine had evolved into a national conversation about racial equity in scientific advancement, proving that even the quietest truth, when spoken with courage, could create profound change. What would you do if you discovered special abilities within yourself that others might want to exploit? Has this story of courage, family connection, and standing up against discrimination moved you? If so, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of triumph against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest situations, courage and connection can overcome seemingly impossible odds. Drop a comment below telling us which part of Elijah and Ranger's journey touched you most deeply. Thank you for joining us for this extraordinary story, and remember, sometimes the quietest whispers carry the most powerful truths. This story reminds us that discrimination often hides behind institutional facades, cloaked in technical language and justified through systemic biases. Project Sentinel exemplifies how racial targeting persists in modern forms, with minorities bearing disproportionate risks in the name of progress. The Jackson family's journey teaches us that true strength emerges, not from physical power or scientific enhancement, but from unbreakable bonds of family and principle. Elijah's blindness, initially seen as a disability, became his greatest strength, a powerful metaphor for how our perceived limitations often contain hidden gifts. Officer Chen demonstrates that integrity requires action, not just disagreement with broken systems. The contrast between Washington's betrayal and Chen's courage shows that meaningful change demands risk and sacrifice from those inside corrupted institutions. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights how discrimination thrives in shadows and secrecy. The exposure of Project Sentinel to public scrutiny ultimately brought justice where private resistance could not. We learn that speaking truth about racial injustice, even when dangerous, creates ripples that become waves of accountability. The Jacksons' transformation from victims to advocates shows how personal trauma can fuel systemic change when channeled into purposeful action. Their foundation ensures that their suffering creates protection for others, the most powerful legacy possible. Has this story of courage against discrimination touched something deep inside you? We all face moments where standing for what's right comes at a cost. What injustice would you risk everything to fight? Share your thoughts in the CosentWhy.com comments below. If you believe in the power of family bonds to overcome even the darkest circumstances, hit that like button to spread this message of hope and resilience. Subscribe to join our storytelling community, where we explore the extraordinary courage of ordinary people facing impossible odds. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could make a difference? This story shows that even one person's brave stand can create meaningful change. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters in the fight against injustice. Thank you for accompanying Elijah Ranger and the Jackson family on this powerful journey. Remember, in a world where some voices are systematically silenced, amplifying stories of triumph over discrimination might be the most important thing we can do together.